Stevenson. He is a sales representative and brand ambassador for Daniel Smith Manufacturing. Scott has had the privilege to be in the industry for 20 plus years, working with some of the most well known manufacturers in art materials. His biggest joy comes from working with artists and inspiring them with color. Scott's art journey started many years ago as a young father who used watercolor as a way to stay awake during the early years after his son's birth. His favorite subject matter is landscape and abstract. Besides his love of watercolor, Scott enjoys all forms of art and music. He lives in the San Francisco Bay Area in California with his wife, Tracy. And I'd like to introduce and welcome him tonight for our meeting. Scott?
Hi there. Thank you for the oops, make sure my volume's on, make sure I can hear everybody. Yep. Thank you for the warm welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So many different things to think about, Linda, as you were going through your notes for the meeting, and I cannot stress how important it is right now to support all of our small and local business. I work with many of these folks in the art materials industry, and it's so important. They are literally getting by on a wing and a prayer, literally. So please, as you consider making your purchases, not only consider them, but also think about the person who the other people who are in that shop who depend on the sales and other sorts of support from customers like yourself. It's really easy to go on Amazon and order products, and I'm guilty of that as well. But please, when it comes to your art materials, your products that you all use every day, the money that you save from ordering online, think about the lives that it does impact from the folks who are at your local stores. Really funny, I'm thinking about, here we are, we're at the 1 year anniversary, and I was looking at my calendar today, and a year ago I was lecturing at the University of Virginia. And prior to getting started there, my wife had called and said, hey, you better keep an eye on this COVID thing. We don't know if you're going to be able to get home or not. So I went ahead and I finished my meeting and I rushed to the airport and I was on the last flight out to California. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, oh, this will just be for a couple of months, at the very worst. But here we are 1 year later, and it's certainly been a life changer for me and my family. We've been very fortunate health-wise. We have not contracted the virus, and our family here is all safe. So we feel very, very blessed and fortunate. But I have so many friends and family who have lost loved ones due to this terrible pandemic, and for a long period of time, I sat at home, just literally grieving over what my friends have lost and what was going on with my coworkers and these store owners like Art Things. And I was literally in a state of depression for literally a month, just trying to fathom and wrap my head around exactly what was happening.
That's where
One day,
were. That's where we were when we met on the phone.
Yeah.
You were just getting over all that smoke and all that terrible smoke
Exactly.
from the fires and all.
Exactly.
And it was difficult. It was very, very difficult.
Yeah,
So we've gotten through it. We made a plan, and you're here.
We made a plan, and we got through it. And one day over summer, I was just thinking about kind of reimagining how I was going to do things. And for those of you who don't know me, I used to do these all in person, these demonstrations and lectures and that's actually where I met my good friend Linda here. And so I used to be able to do all of these lectures on the road, and then suddenly, March 15th comes along and everything kind of ground to a halt. So I had to kind of reimagine about how I did this. And one day I called one of my favorite customers and I said, I don't know how this is going to work. Either it's going to be great and it'll be wonderful, or this is going to go down in flames, but I'm going to try and do this over Zoom. And so I did, and it went well. Learned a few tricks along the way. And now I'm to the point where I'm probably doing these at least once a week for the rest of the year. So yeah, so crazy times. A little bit more about me. I, like my good friend Linda said, I've been in the industry for 20 plus years now. I am a manufacturer's rep and a brand ambassador for Daniel Smith. So one day I got a phone call from Daniel Smith asking me to be their rep. And at first I was kind of thinking that it was kind of a prank, because when I was a young father, I had a friend give me a tube of Daniel Smith Mayan Blue. And I started to play with it and soon became so in love with it that it really made it hard to go back to working with the praying watercolor that I had started with. So anyway, so I became one of these guys that would literally look under the washer and dryer and pick up every penny that he found, just so that he could save up for his next tube of Daniel Smith paint. So you can imagine what was going through my mind when the president of Daniel Smith called and asked me to be their sales rep, and I really thought it was kind of a prank. So I kind of I was just playing along, saying, sure, yeah, I'll give it some thought. And then in the back of my mind, it was, well, maybe this really is her. And then I said, well, you know what? I'm done thinking about it. I'll start tomorrow. And she said, wonderful. Can we send you some paint to get started with? And I said, yeah, that would be wonderful. And she said, well, what can we send you? I said, well, why don't you just send me everything? And then she laughed over the phone and said, okay, well, let me send you about a dozen or so colors, and then you can just kind of build up your collection over time. So that's how I got started. And then about a year into being a sales rep, I started doing these demos and lectures for Daniel Smith. And I was lucky enough to be able to do them pretty much all over North America, between Toronto and Florida and pretty much all points in between. So when the pandemic hit, I decided I needed to figure out how to do this from home, and it's gone really well. So I'm very excited to be here with you all today. And I'm going to be kind of bouncing around between another camera, and I'm going to be sharing my screen so I can show you kind of what happens behind the scenes at Daniel Smith. And so go ahead and put your questions into the chat, and Linda will go ahead and grab them for me there. And this is an opportunity for you all to ask questions. So I enjoy questions. So please go ahead and put those in the chat. All right, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And what you're going to see is this here, which is a kind of a little PowerPoint that I use to kind of give you all a frame of reference. So it all kind of started in 1976 with this gentleman here by the name of Daniel Smith, and that is his real name. That's not his Hollywood name. We didn't make up Dan Smith. That's who he is. So he was got his first job actually in the art materials industry at the University of Washington in Seattle. And one day they were all standing around the printing press that prints the school newspaper, and they were lamenting about how terrible their printmaking ink was and how wonderful it would be if somebody would actually make a better ink. So they went around the room to all of the other employees, and finally it came around to Dan, and Dan volunteered and said, yeah, I'll give that a shot. So he did some research, and he found the best black pigment he can find and the best oil-based binder he can find. And he brought it back to his parents' basement in Seattle, Washington. And he mixed the ingredients together and brought them back to the school printing press. And lo and behold, it was much better. So it didn't take long for the school art department to hear about this wonderful ink that the newspaper was using, and approached Dan and asked them if they could get a batch for themselves. So they went ahead and used it, loved it, and then came back to him and said, hey, could you make this in about 5 or 6 other colors? So he went ahead and sourced all the product and milled it, did all of the manufacturing, brought it back to the school art department. And they loved it. Matter of fact, so much so that the students were actually selling the ink that they were supposed to use for their projects. So finally, it got to the point where Dan couldn't keep up with the orders from the art department anymore, and he ended up having to quit his job at the school printing press so he could be a full-time paint manufacturer. So here's a look at Dan. Dan's the guy that's actually sitting at the mill right there. And those were 2 of his early employees, which were his 2 friends. So you get to kind of look and see what the first factory looked like. And the other thing to note too is that mill that you see Dan sitting in front of. Dan made his first big investment by selling his motorcycle so he could afford that first mill there. So as time progressed, Dan decided that he wanted to make another product, and that product was our Daniel Smith original oil, which he developed in 1989. But it wasn't until 1993 that Dan decided that he wanted to make watercolor. And he was really stuck because he didn't exactly know what it should look like, what it should feel like, what it should do, what shouldn't it do. So what he ended up doing was he ended up going on the road and going to watercolor festivals around the world, like the ones in Fabriano and the ones in China, the Philippines, some of the early plein air conventions. And he would literally spend days talking with artists, finding out what they wanted in a watercolor. So after a while, he took all of that information with him back to Seattle and back to his factory. And he pulled all of the ingredients together that was needed to make it. And he did the best manufacturing job he could. And he brought it back to the festivals to let them try. And it was a hit. The artists who gave him all of the feedback were some of the first that Dan allowed to use his products and promote. So basically, we started with 18 colors at that point, and to kind of put that in perspective, we have 260 today. So in 1998, Dan was able to really take his dream of what watercolors should be like and really take it to the next level. And the thing that you should know, another fun thing to know about Dan is that Dan is really a guy who loves history. And he was really fascinated with these folks down here. See at the bottom down there where it says ancient peoples. He was really interested in those peoples in terms of how they expressed themselves with color. So you had the Mayans, the Egyptians, the Incans, Plains Indians, the Inuits, and some of the other ancient peoples. And he was really curious about how they expressed themselves with color, and what did they use to create color with. So for instance, I'm going to go ahead and flip out of this for a second so you can kind of see what I'm showing you. Is one of the first ancient peoples that really used minerals or rocks were the Plains Indians, and they would take this is turquoise. Actually, this is our Sleeping Beauty turquoise. And they would take this and they would grind it very finely and then mix it with animal fat. And then this became their war paint. Another interesting example was the Mayans and the Egyptians. And the Egyptians would take lapis lazuli, and either they would turn this into a paint or use it as jewelry. And if anybody in Egyptian civilization was wearing this color, they were generally very well thought of and very well to do in an Egyptian society. So we have all of these wonderful examples of throughout history where the ancient civilizations either used minerals or they used rocks to create color to express themselves. here. There we go. So this is, so basically when Dan decided to incorporate minerals into his palette of color, he ran into several issues. The first one was that he couldn't produce or couldn't mill down the mineral in sufficient quantities in the same way that the ancient civilizations did. So he had to come up with a different manufacturing process where he could manufacture large amounts of mineral in bulk. So it took him some time, but then he finally figured it out, and he called that process Primatech, which is short for primitive technology. So anytime you hear that word Primatech, in the back of your mind, you should be thinking about minerals, that this color is derived from a mineral. So here's a little flow chart that kind of describes how we do it. And then in the other pages, we'll get into a little bit more detail. It all kind of starts with this guy named Bruce. And Bruce is our full-time mineralogist. He gets to travel the world and work with our mine owners to source our beautiful minerals that we turn into paint. So one of the criteria that Bruce uses when he's finding mineral is that he has to make sure that he sources a 15-year supply. So let me ask you this: why do we need such a big supply of mineral? Go ahead and put it in the chat, and Linda will read it. You guys are pretty quiet. All right, I'll give you the first one. Color consistency. The number one thing that we consider, and one of the benefits of buying in 15-year increments, is that the color will be consistent. So let me ask you this: what happens when we go to Costco and we buy in bulk? We get a better what because we buy in bigger quantities? Right. We get a better price because we buy in bulk. So when we're able to buy in bulk, it allows us to get a better price. And then the third thing that's also very important, and it's more to do with our customers like Art Things, is that we want to always have a consistent supply. So we don't ever want to be out because it's very important for you all to be able to go to an art store and be able to find our colors on a consistent basis. So when we go to make a batch of paint, we go to the we go to our where we store all of our minerals, and we break off a piece about the size of a watermelon. So think about that. Think about what a water-sized melon piece of rock would look like. So we take that watermelon-sized piece of rock and we take it to our first mill, which is what we call a jaw mill. So you see it down there on the bottom of page 4. And basically what that does is that it puts a gentle amount of pressure on the mineral and it causes it to break into smaller pieces. So basically from that watermelon-sized piece of mineral, we'll get about 15 pieces of mineral that are about this size. So basically we're going to be going from a watermelon size down to a softball size. So, and the really cool thing really with this whole process is that we're going to take something that's very, very, very large, and then we're going to make it actually into something that's very, very small. So, and what's great about it is that even though we make it really, really small, we don't lose what's interesting and valuable about it. So now that we have the mineral down to this size, we take it to our next mill, which is what we call our hammer mill. And the hammer mill looks like this. Yeah, on the next one. So it looks like that right there on the top left. So basically what it is it has a spinning blade, and that blade gently eats into the mineral and removes the product that we don't want. So I'm going to show you a piece of lapis here. And so that you can see it. So can you see all of the gray here on the mineral? This is all a byproduct that we can't use. So we have to figure out a way to remove it. And the way that we're able to remove it is with the hammer mill. And the hammer mill, with that spinning blade, gently eats into the mineral and leaves the part of the mineral that we do want. And most of the time, we are now looking at mineral that is now this size. So we went from that big watermelon piece of mineral, we went to a softball piece. Now we're down to something that's this size. And generally speaking, we'll probably get probably about a dozen pieces this size from something this big, maybe a little bit bigger in this. So after we get the mineral to this size, this is really where I think the miracle really happens in all of this. And it happens with what at a mill that we call a ball mill, which is what you see down there on the bottom of 5, where it says ball mill picture number 1. So basically what we do is we take that little pieces of marble-sized mineral and we load them in on the side, and they go into the ball mill where they are met by 1,000 or so miniature ball bearings, and they crash against the little pieces of mineral, causing it to break down into something that is very, very, very small. Basically, if any of you have your handout in front of you there and you feel the thickness of that paper or feel the thickness of your color chart, that is 100 microns. What we break this mineral down into is 40 microns. So literally what we're breaking the mineral down into is literally half the thickness of that sheet of paper. And your hair, by the way, is 70 microns. So it's almost half the thickness of a human hair. But yet it is still, even though it is so small, we still don't lose what's interesting and valuable about the mineral. So we don't lose all of this wonderful granulation that you see here in green apatite. Or if we're looking at kyanite, the shimmer. So even though we make that mineral so small, we don't lose what's interesting and valuable about it. So it's pretty amazing. It's a wonderful process, and it's totally unique. There's no one in the world, no other paint manufacturer in the world that does what we do with minerals. It's something that genuinely makes us different than anyone else. All right. Okay, so now that we have the mineral down to the size that we want, we blend it with our other ingredients. So we only have 3 ingredients to our paint. We only have gum arabic, and we have the pigment or mineral, and then we have distilled water. So let me ask you this: what is in tap water, and why wouldn't we want to use it? Jeanette. Okay. So what do we have in tap water? So we have a number of things in tap water, right? So we have our fluorine, and in some parts of the country it has chlorine. And if you lived out in California in the farm country, and maybe this is true in other parts of our nation as well, that the water, because it has calcium in it, makes the water very hard. So you could have other minerals in it, you could have fluorine, you could have all these other things. So let me ask you this: does this sound great for making a consistent product? So the answer to that is no. And the reason why that is that all of that stuff, all of those particles of that stuff takes up space in the solution of the water and creates what we call variables. And we don't like variables, because what can happen when you have variables in your paint making process is that unforeseen things can happen, like colors could have cold spots, or they could have hot spots. It could have areas where it looks difference in the same brush stroke. So the way that we remedy that is that we use distilled water instead, which doesn't have any of those other particles floating around in it. So all that we have to contend with is really just the H2O. So, and when you think about it, and actually maybe when you get some time, I would recommend doing this, is that I would take you take a cup of tap water and take a cup of distilled water and try painting with them. Try painting with both of them and see if you notice anything different. The first time I did it, I noticed that it was very subtle, but what I noticed was with the distilled water that the paint or the color looked a little bit more vibrant. And the reason for that is that when you don't have that other stuff floating around in your water, those paint particles are closer together and it makes your paint look slightly more vibrant. All right.
So there is a question. What is the difference between a cold spot and a hot spot?
So a cold spot is when you're going to see something that looks dull. A hot spot is something where it looks like like there's actually granules where the paint is more intense.
There's a question. I'm not sure if I understand, but it says the water from a dehumidifier, is that distilled? I don't think so.
Good. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I tend to think that there's still things that are atmospheric that are still there. But certainly, I've had some people use water purifiers and things like that, and that's helpful, but it doesn't remove absolutely everything like distilled water can.
Like a Brita filtered water? Is it? No.
Probably not.
Okay, so they're asking, so where do you get the distilled water?
Actually, you can buy distilled water at the grocery store.
Oh, well, we can go to the grocery stores again. We can get distilled water.
Yeah.
Okay. And toilet paper. Okay.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Let me jump back in here. Okay. So now that we have all of our three ingredients together, we put them in these mixing vessels, and the pictures are actually a little bit deceiving. So the smallest one you see there is 3 gallons, and the largest one there in the back is really, really big. It's actually 300 gallons, but we had to kind of squish them down in order to make them fit into the picture. So we put our ingredients in there and we take them down to the bottom where you see the mixing station. And that mixing station also is a little deceptive. When we use that mixer, it looks like it should probably sit on your workbench or on a workbench, but actually that mixing station we raise up 16 feet tall, and it creates a huge amount of torque, and it churns our paint very rapidly. It creates what's called a Venturi effect, and it draws a lot of air down into the mixture of the paint. And two things happen. The first thing that happens is that it changes the texture of the paint. It makes it more like heavy whipped cream. And then the second thing that happens, which is just kind of something that happens or comes with the territory per se, is that when you introduce air into the mixture of the paint, it creates or develops static electricity, and those paint particles want to tangle. And what we call that is a particle agglomerate. So you see that down there at the bottom of the page here. And all of those circles all intertangled, that's kind of what it looks like. So what does it look like to you as an artist? Well, we talked about cold spots a moment ago. And this is kind of, if you were to look under the microscope of the paint particle, this is what you would see. This is what an agglomerate would look like. But if you were to put your brush into that bucket of paint that you see there on the left, brush it out, you would see some spots that would look absolutely fine. And then there would be others that would have some dullness to it. And that's why we call it a cold spot. So we want the particles to actually look like what you see down there on the bottom, where you have those circles next to each other in more of a linear fashion. And then that arrow is actually the light as it enters the paint particle and exit. We want to make sure that the light exits in the same way that you see there. So we have to take it to our next mill, and that next mill really helps us to remedy the agglomerate to make it look more like the circles that you see down below there. So when we call that mill, we call it a dispersion mill, and it looks like this. It's also called a 3-roll mill, and it's very common in the paint industry, and it does some very interesting things, and it works in a very interesting way. So those cylinders there all spin in opposite directions. So you start at the far end. So if you look at the picture here to the right at the top, the paint starts on the far end, and then it travels along the 3 cylinders and then comes down here to where this triangle is, which is what we call the apron, and it comes out over here. So basically what happens is when the paint goes over that first cylinder, the cylinder is going in this direction. And then when the paint comes, it comes up over the top, and then it hits the second cylinder, and then the second cylinder is spinning in the opposite direction. And it's literally like a train wreck has just happened. It is this ripping apart of paint particles. And what we really want to have happen is that second cylinder, when it rips it apart, it allows the gum arabic to get in between each of those paint particles. And then the same thing happens again when it hits the third cylinder, and then it rips it apart again, and then the paint exits on the apron. So this is kind of what it looks like as it comes off on the far end. So paint started over there on the far end, and then it travels along the 3 cylinders and then exits down here on the apron.
Okay, there's a question. Can you keep paint moist by adding glycerin, or should you add gum arabic?
My first choice is always gum arabic, and the reason for that is that's the binder of the paint. And I'm always leery about adding an additive that wasn't already in the original formulation of the paint to begin with. All right, so this is what it looks like as the paint is basically being put on the cylinders or on the three-roll mill, and then on the far end there'll be a guy. This same bucket will be on the other end. And that gentleman that you see down there to the left, he's actually catching the paint as it comes down the apron. And depending upon what the paint looks like, determines whether or not this has to go through 2, 3, 4, 5 different rounds through this process. And then just one last thing to kind of sum it up there on the 3-roll mill. Because the tolerances are so close, or there's such a little amount of distance between each of those cylinders, it literally crushes the extra air out of the paint.
There's a question, I don't know if this is the right time or not, but
Sure.
why are some colors more granulated than others?
Well, some of it actually happens by choice. We want to create a paint that is unique and different to other paint manufacturers. So depending upon what our vision is for the color, we can make it granulating or not granulating. All right. So as the paint exits the 3-roll mill and it's in those buckets, we load the paint into the top of our tube filling station here. And then underneath it, there will be a carousel. And this carousel will have the tubes upside down. So the paint will come in, or the tubes will come in upside down like this. And this part here will be open. And the machine will then put the applicator into the tube and inject the right amount of product, and then it will crimp it. So it'll crimp it right here. And then as it's exiting the machine, there is a part of the machine that will actually stamp a code into the crimp of the paint. So in that code is what we call our batch number. And that batch number will correspond with one of these, which is what we call a paint out. Now, the paint out is really important because not only does it act as a QC check, but it on the back will also end up writing the precise amount of the product that we use to make the batch. So we'll have the amount of the pigment or the amount of the mineral. We'll have the amount of the gum arabic and distilled water. All of that ends up being disclosed back here. The other thing that happens is that we also put the name of every machine operator who was working that day on that batch of paint. So if we ever have an issue where somebody, we have to go back and look, we can always find the person who made the batch of paint and ask questions so that we can figure out if we have a problem or not.
And that kind of helped when you had to name Moonglow, didn't it?
Well, Moonglow is an interesting story. So Moonglow is our oops color. We didn't intend to make it. One day when we were, our chemist was making our initial batch of paint for this, had a long weekend. He's never admitted to what happened. But he got a little overzealous with one of the pigments that he was using, and went all the way through the process. And John, who's the current owner of Daniel Smith, painted out the color and said, "What's this?" And then the chemist said, "Well, I don't know." Well, and John says, "Well, something happened here." Well, and the more that John started to play with the product, the more that he fell in love with it, and he decided to call it Moonglow because it's really a wonderful color for shadows and things like that. All right, I'll go back here. All right, so let's get into a few things. Let's talk about light fastness for a moment. Light fastness, the definition of light fastness is a pigment's ability to resist ultraviolet light, and certain pigments are able to resist it better than others. So one of the things that we do is that we have a machine that will accurately tell us how long our colors will last when exposed to ultraviolet light. So we call this machine a xenon phaedometer. So you see it there on the top left, and this is actually what it looks like on the inside. So on the inside, you have a carousel where we put our paint outs. And then in the middle there, if you see that shaft, there's like a shaft that comes down. And in the middle of that, there's actually a light bulb. And that light bulb produces a very, very, very bright amount of light. Basically, it can replicate over 120 years of light exposure in 4 days. So think about that for a minute. So 120 times 365, and we're able to replicate that in 4 days. So it's pretty amazing. So at the end of the 4 days, we'll take the paint out and put it next to a template, and then based upon the amount of fade that we see, helps us determine what the light fastness is of the color. So that's how we're able to accurately tell you how long colors will last. All right, the other machine there you see is a photo spectrometer. And this is a machine that helps us determine or helps us to be consistent with color. So basically you see the black handle, it's the machine to the right where it says photo spectrometer, and you can pull that handle towards you, and what's on the other side of that is a window where you're able to put a portion of your paint out, and then that machine will chemically break down the composition of the color. So basically, it'll take a reading, and then what we'll do is we'll find a batch from maybe 20 years ago, and we'll go ahead and map and see how close of a match it is. If it's way off, then we go back to the drawing board on that batch of paint, because we are fanatics about trying to make our paint be consistent over the years. All right, let's talk about granulation for a moment. Now I'm going to get out of this, and I'm going to show you a different color this time. I'm going to show you, this
There's
is a
a
color called,
question about
go ahead.
this. It says, okay, Michelle's asked this, since you're working with a natural mineral, aren't there differences in mineral color, and therefore, how do you get consistent color?
A lot of it is because we buy in such large amounts. So when we buy the mineral, like I mentioned earlier, we buy it in increments of 15 years. So we do our best to work with the same mine owners. And when we do find the product or the color that we want, that's why we buy in such large amounts. We buy in 15-year increments so that we can have as close or as much consistency as we can possibly make it.
I know I got a frantic phone call a couple weeks ago from an artist friend.
Mhm.
You know, Quinacridone Gold is your good old standby, your number one.
Yes.
And
Secret
they have
sauce.
been told that it's no longer going to be available, that it's not, that we have to buy it all right away. And I said, well, let's just leave that question to Scott, but I know, having talked with you earlier, that's just not going to happen.
No, that color is never going away. No, but there are some changes to it. So originally, our original quinacridone gold, which was PO49, was a single pigment, a single pigment solution for the pigment. Now, how many gold cars do you all really see on the road these days? Let me ask you that. There's not that many, right? So when the automotive industry decided that they really weren't going to make as many gold cars anymore, the pigment manufacturers said, well, if our largest customer is not going to use it anymore, why are we still going to produce it? So basically what ended up happening was in the year 2000, that pigment manufacturer stopped making the single pigment solution for quinacridone gold. And every paint manufacturer from the year 2000 on had to use a two pigment solution, which for most folks ended up being PO48 and then either nickel titanate yellow or some other derivative in order to try and replicate the color. So we found the last batch of it in the year 2000, and it lasted us 17 years. So in the year 2017, we had to rejoin the rest of the paint manufacturers of the world and go to a pigment solution, a two pigment solution for Quin Gold. So what's really interesting though, and this will tell you, for some folks, I'm sure they can pick it out. But for years, we had the two pigment solution going into our 5 mil tubes. And let me ask you this: how many people do you think approached me saying that they noticed the difference between the 15 mil Quin Gold and the 5 mil Quin Gold? I think maybe there was one. So, but there are differences if you're looking for it. The new Quin Gold is slightly more yellow when it's wet, but it's still very very willing and able to blend with other colors, and it doesn't end up muddying them, even though it has one more pigment associated with it now. All right. Okay. So we were just going to chat about granulation for a minute. So here's kind of how granulation kind of works. So you have the pigment or the mineral that's heavier than the gum arabic and the distilled water that it sits in. So it wants to flow into the tooth of the paper or into the little nooks and crannies or the peaks and valleys. And when it does that, the pigment flows down into the valleys, and then the gum arabic and distilled water stays on the top. And basically what ends up happening is that you end up getting this look, which is what we call granulation. So, granulation is also affected by the paper that you use. So let me ask you this: do you think you're going to get more or less granulation out of a paper like hot press? Less, right? because because hot press is actually very smooth. So there's not as much peaks and valleys for the paint particles to flow into. So let me ask you this. So now that we're talking about cold press and rough, we expect to see more, right? Because there's more texture associated with the paper, and those nooks and crannies are farther apart. So because those nooks and crannies are farther apart, you get more room for the paint particles to flow in between them. So what can we use granulation for? Don't say texture. I'll reach through Zoom and slap y'all. You guys don't get off that easy. So
Oh, they're being quiet. They're not saying anything yet. Oh, wait a minute. Here comes a stone.
stone, very good, very good.
Yay,
What?
Terry.
Yes, right. So what about this color here? What could we use this color for?
Hmm.
Forest, yes. Very good, Terry. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, Mindy, you got it right. I love using this color, green apatite, for foliage. It does a wonderful job. And just in general, for me, what I really like about granulation is it does a much better job of articulating what nature can do than I can with my brush or even a pen. So if I'm working with a landscape and really want to hone in on a more natural look or feel, I'll use a granulating color because it just naturally wants to do what nature does.
There's a question. Let me see if I can get back to it. If all of your colors mineral based, if not, what are the non-mineral colors made from?
So the non-mineral colors. So only 37 of our 260 colors are made from minerals. The other colors are either synthetic or they're still natural, but they just don't derive from mineral. So let's think about yellow ochre for a moment. Yellow ochre is something that comes from the earth, or umber. Both of those colors come from the earth, but are not mineral based. The balance of our colors are synthetic, so they're created in a lab, and depending upon which pigment we're talking about, we can have them granulate or not granulate. We have so many tools at our disposal to really create interesting and different effects just by working with the particle size, for instance.
There's a question about whether color plays a part in this at all. Is in the question, the way it's stated, is there something about the mineral makeup of darker pigment that makes it chase itself off the paper? I'm having a visual of what that looks like. That's getting chased off the paper. So
I think that's when, if I understand correctly, I think that's there are certain colors like this one. This is probably a good example of that, where you see because the particles or the granulation is so heavy and so intense that it creates a very heavily modeled type of texture. So I'm thinking that's what she's talking about, and really this happens because of the size of the particles of the mineral.
yeah, it's not necessarily the color that's darker color that's making that happen.
No, not exactly.
It's the
And there
weight.
are,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And some colors, even they could be transparent in nature and still be heavy granulating. So it's really interesting how we can have these different characteristics and still have them granulate.
There's a question that you've heard about well, here's the question. If you open a tube and the gum arabic has gathered on the top, what should you do?
I think the easiest thing to do is probably just to get a sewing needle or a T-pen, and then you could just mix it in the tube and reconstitute it that way. The gum arabic that you see at the top, I'm told, even if it's present, your paint is still fine. You just before you paint with it, of course, when you put it in your palette, you just want to make sure that you swirl the paint together so that it reconstitutes again. But it's
These
not
are really
a.
good questions.
No, those are great questions. I heard earlier this color here. This is actually bloodstone. This is the color bloodstone. All right, let's head back. All right, let's talk about quinacridone for a moment. Now, everybody loves quinacridone, me included. I'm a quinacridone gold fanatic. I call it secret sauce. So I find this really interesting. So quinacridone is a Latin word. So quin means 5, cridone means ring. So basically what the word means is 5 rings. So you can kind of see the rings there at the top, right underneath the word quinacridone. And we break down actually what it all means. So basically, if you go down to properties, you can see the chemical composition of quinacridone, or the chemical formula there for quinacridone. So what's really interesting about quinacridone is it's a couple of things that I really like. Number one, I really enjoy the just the range of color that we get. We could be very orange, or we could almost be, or we can be purple. We have just beautiful choices in terms of color. And what's really interesting to me is that these colors are non-granulating, so they're really wonderful for doing washes and things like that. And there's a reason why we don't see any granulation here. So each of those paint particles, quinacridone paint particles, they're all the same size, the same shape, and the same weight. So think about a jigsaw puzzle for a moment, and what happens when you bring those pieces together if they were all the same? Basically, they would just come together seamlessly, and what you would have is because they're not taller than each other, not wider, not shorter, heavier, that they come together perfectly, and that's why we don't see granulation with this at all. Other cool thing too is, we talked about, I mentioned the range of color, and what ends up happening is that ring that you see all the way to the left there, we call that the beta ring. And what ends up happening is when we want to make a variant of the original quinacridone pigment, we alter that last ring there, the beta ring. And when we do that, it changes the way that light refracts from the pigment, and it changes the way that our eye sees the color. So depending upon how they angle that last ring determines what color our eye sees. All right, I'm going to move this along. So I'm just going to show you a few of our, here's some side-by-sides of our quinacridone colors. I have some favorites. I already told you about Quin Gold, but I also really love Quin Rose over here. I think that's a beautiful color for a lot of different things. But this is a kind of a good snapshot of some of our quinacridone colors.
So Sherry's looking for with the shimmery ones. What are some of the shimmery ones?
Some of the shimmery ones. Okay, so kyanite, which I'm going to go ahead and show you a few of those. So this is kyanite. This is what the kyanite mineral looks like. And it has, you can kind of see if I can get it to sparkle a little bit, but it has a lot of mica associated with it. And it creates this color here. So kyanite is one. Another one is red fuchsite, which, let's see, yep, I do have it. So this is red fuchsite. It's tough to make it jump when you have the when the camera wants to see things one way. There's also bronzite. Bronzite also shimmers. Burnt bronzite, And even amethyst will shimmer a little bit. Amethyst definitely has some mica associated with it as well. But those are the main ones that come to mind when I think about colors that shimmer.
So it's the addition of the mica.
Mm-hmm. Well, the mica is natural to the
Right.
mineral, so we don't add anything to make it shimmer.
Okay. She said that electric blue, iridescent electric blue, is that one?
Iridescent electric blue is part of our luminescent series.
Okay.
It uses a synthetic mica, not a natural one like kyanite or bronzite, any of those others do. All right. Just going to show you a few of the minerals that we use. Like I've already shown you kyanite. One of our more popular ones up here is amazonite, and amazonite is a beautiful, beautiful mineral. It also produces a really nice color. This is amazonite. This is what the mineral looks like. And lots of interesting history with amazonite. The indigenous in South America believed that amazonite could cure their sick. And the reason why they thought that was that it didn't matter whether it was a hot day in August, that they could pick this mineral up and it always felt really, really, really cool. So they would take the amazonite and they would rest it on their sick, and they thought that this would help heal their sick. All right, I'll show you a few others here. This is tiger's eye, and we get tiger's eye from South Africa, and I really love this color because it had such a soft brown. A lot of uses for it, and the mineral itself is really beautiful. You can kind of see how it kind of shimmers there, but it doesn't really. We really don't get that in the paint, unfortunately. But it's a beautiful mineral. And something interesting that we do when we want to change the color a little bit on this, we'll take this and we'll put it in a kiln for about 8 hours, and then when we're done, it comes out looking like this. So the heat changes the oxidation state, and when it does that, it actually ends up changing the color entirely.
Wow.
So we have a lot of different ways to kind of manipulate color with minerals. Heat is probably the biggest way. I saw there was a question that came in.
Yeah, it says, do you make a true manganese blue color?
Manganese blue, I'm just going to double check my color chart, but I am pretty sure we still use real manganese. Yes, we do. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. No, we use a hue. So we use a synthetic for manganese blue.
I'm looking back to one of the original questions about explaining some of the numbers that are in the chart, what they mean. Let me see if I can find that original. Okay, the coding on chart, first digit is color fastness, second is staining, third is granulation, correct? And what are the series? Oh, what does that mean? The series? I think you talked about.
The series deals with the price of the color.
Okay, and someone asked, has Daniel Smith ever been in the retail? Are you just now wholesale only, or were you at one time retail?
Well, we still are retail, even though the pandemic has closed our store for a while. But we've done a number of things. We have a retail store in Seattle. We used to have a catalog as well, which had done very well over the years. But in recent years, Daniel Smith has really focused more on wholesale, selling to art stores like Art Things. Then focus on our catalog or even our store even.
Terry wants to know, several paints have Mayan. What does that label Mayan mean?
That's a great question. So basically, what Mayan means is, or the way we interpret Mayan to mean, is the process in which the way that the color is made. So, for instance, like Mayan blue. Mayan blue is what happens when you integrate clay and indigo together, and then when you do that, that creates Mayan blue. So we also have other Mayan colors like Mayan red, Mayan yellow, and the reason why it's the same process, but we inject it with a synthetic color, which is why you don't see Mayan yellow or Mayan red on the backside of the color chart, where the rest of the mineral-based colors are. So, but the term Mayan actually deals more with the pigment manufacturing method.
There's a question about the gum arabic again. Also, where does the gum arabic come from? And is Daniel Smith particular about the tree type it comes from? Does it make a difference in the color type?
We have always purchased our gum arabic from actually from a farm in India, and gum arabic comes from the acacia tree. So we've been buying gum arabic from the same manufacturer now for over 40 years.
So there would be differences from different places maybe, but yours is consistent in that one place where you get that.
Yeah, it's very important, and we've been very lucky that the sourcing of our gum arabic has been very stable.
So I see that the little charts that we have names: George Poultice palette, Primatech palette. And I know I talked with Alex Helkertz just the other day. He's going to be doing our next workshop in April in Paris, that Daniel Smith will be coming out with his palette. Maybe by then, actually. How does that come about for him?
Well, there's two things we've been working on for years and years and years. We've been creating dot cards for artists, and I believe you all probably have one now. We had done that for a lot of years, and then just recently we started creating 5 mil sets for different artists. So George Politis is one, Stella Canfield, Tom Schaller, my favorite. He's my hero. He has his set. Pablo Ruben Sanz, he has a new set. So this is all kind of a new development for us, really, within the last year, where we're developing paint sets based on the needs of artists, and putting them together so folks can buy them.
Great. It's a good thing.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Well, I want to just kind of highlight a few things that I get questions on quite a bit. And Linda, let me know if I'm starting to get close on time.
Okay. Yeah, we're at 23 after, I think.
Okay. We'll just hit a few things here. One of the big questions I get a lot of is, what is a duochrome color? And I think this picture here probably illustrates it about as well as I can explain it, actually. So one half of that paper is in black. It has a black watercolor ground underneath. And then the other side is just the white paper. So depending upon what surface you're looking at it on, determines what you see. So on the white paper, you see that we have a brown there, but then when you look at where we painted over the black watercolor ground, you see something entirely different. So depending upon the color that you have determines what you're going to see. Some will have a brown or a green, and then you'll see these wonderful streaks of gold through it, like Duochrome Oceanic. Or this one here, the Duochrome Saguaro Green. So this is a good example of of what the duochrome colors do and what they look like.
Pretty.
Another question I get a lot is what is the difference between iridescent and interference pigments? So this is a good explanation of it. So iridescent, it's a reflection. So the particle of light hits the paint pigment matrix and then bounces back, much like a mirror. Interference is refraction. So the particle of light enters the paint pigment matrix and scatters the light. So basically most interference colors use mica. And actually, all of these colors use mica. The difference between the iridescent and duochrome and the interference is that the interference mica is coated in a way that scatters light. So it may scatter light in many different directions. And when it does that, we see different things. So with iridescent, the mica is basically one shape and it reflects light uniformly. And that's why we're able to see it not only on black surfaces, but also on white. And then duochrome is like what we talked about. It's one pigment that bounces between two colors.
Pretty.
Here's kind of the information on the color chart. I know some of you have been looking at it already. I'll go through this just quick because I think this is really important to understand. In terms, we give you all of the tools in order to make wise decisions with your paint. The biggest one, I think, is understanding the transparency of the color. What happens when you blend a transparent color with an opaque color? Whose nature does it want to take on? The opaque, right? Because what ends up happening is that the opaque color tends to want to dominate the transparent color. So, and it's really important to know that because when you're wanting to blend colors, you want to know what the reaction is going to be between the two colors. So if you understand the transparency of the color, you'll find that blending colors is actually a lot more predictable. All right.
Is some of that coating on your tubes? I'm looking to see like the transparency and on the tubes themselves.
I'm looking at it as well.
And Kathy would like to know what pigments would be best used on black watercolor paper.
Black watercolor paper, I really like the iridescent colors. The iridescent colors are wonderful because they will work on black as well as white. So they're very versatile that way. So they jump in a big way on black, but then they're still usable on white. Interference colors are I think a little tougher to work with just in terms of understanding the way that they interact with other colors that are not interference based.
And I think you've answered this before when this was asked, maybe not tonight, but your cadmiums, you've pulled cadmiums out quite some time ago. You don't have the cadmium issue. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we pulled the cadmiums out some time ago, and basically we synthesized each of the cadmium colors. Some of them you'll notice them right away because they say hue on them. So anything that any of the cadmium colors that you see that says hue, you know that's not genuine cadmium, but a synthesized mixture of pigments in order to come close to that color.
If I remember correctly, a lot of the reason for that, you have a small manufacturing facility and did not want to expose your workers that were manufacturing these to the cadmium.
So yeah, absolutely. The cadmium particles are so fine that masks can't actually filter them out. And not only that, the particles are so small that it can be absorbed into our skin. And especially in that process where you have literally millions of particles floating around in the air. And it's also more of an issue too with the pigment manufacturers also that they actually have even more exposure because they're actually developing the pigment itself, and they actually have a lot more exposure because of the volumes that they work with.
Wow. Well, we're going to have another minute and then, or two if you need more, and then going to pick our winners for
Yes, let's pick winners.
Pick the winners. And I don't know, Richard, if you had something special for us for that time with the music. He's our, okay. I think we'll just go with what we've got here. Very, very informative, everyone is saying, and thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you all. I missed not seeing you all in person, but this has been a lot of fun tonight. So thank you. I appreciate everyone's participation.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh dear. Okay, so now if we're going to pick the winners, so this, once again, I will explain, and I want to tell you something else wonderful that what all of you did. Yes, we did get the money up front to Art Things to get the items in the gift box, which is over $200 worth of Daniel Smith art products and brushes and different things that you've seen in the newsletter and emails and whatnot. But then also the gift card for $75 is the second prize, and then $25 is the third prize. But in order to get the raffle tickets, which are all these little things in here that Liz sent to me today, and so, but in order to do that, you had to make your donation. We have raised almost $750 for Maryland Hall by doing this, which is really wonderful. So that $750 that we raised through the purchase of these raffle tickets will go to Maryland Hall, and they are designating it for students that would like to take art classes that need some financial assistance right now or in coming forward maybe through the summertime. So we are helping a lot of children go to art classes that would not be able to do that. And through your generosity, just so I'm saying good going, guys. I'm really happy to be part of everything that we have going on. So first prize, what I'll do is the third prize. He told me to remind me to do how to do this. Okay, so the third prize. Yeah, that's the $25 gift card. Okay, so the drum roll, da, 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 Richard. Okay, we'll pretend it happened. Number 20, Brenda, Brenda, Pire. So you received the $25 gift card, which is at Art Things. So that's number 3. And I have to write things down because I have to remember. Okay, so that's Brenda. And you can pick up your gift card at Art Things. And if you need help with that, I don't know where you live, Brenda. If you're out of the Pennsylvania or Maryland or whatever, we'll have it mailed to you. Okay, the number 2 is the $75 gift card I have in my little bucket here. Well, thing. Okay, so number 2, that is the $75 gift card. And that goes to number 28. Karen DeGraffin Reed, yay! All this hard work that you have for the membership and all that, you get a treat, $75 gift card to Art Things. So that's number $75 gift card. And that will be at Art Things. So you can go there with your gift card and buy stuff. Okay, so now the grand prize winner is the big gift box with all those really cool things. All right, so here we go. We got them in here. Here they are. Okay. Grand prize winner, here you are. And it is Darlene, Darlene, Malat is your last name. Darlene, Malat. Okay, so you have that also is the gift box, and it is at Art Things, and you can pick it up there. And thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure. And Scott, it has just been a pleasure to work with you again, and look forward to buying your products. So Scott has talked with them at Art Things about the products that he has that they should have a nice supply of things. So if you want to try this special different things, then you can go there and they will help you with that. Thank you,
Absolutely. Thank you
everyone.
very much, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.